You know that specific moment the statement arrives? The balance at the top, the minimum payment due printed just below it, considerably smaller, considerably easier to look at. And you know which number you are about to pay. Not because you calculated it, because you stopped calculating it years ago. The full balance is simply what the card costs this month.
The way rent is what the apartment costs. The way groceries are what the week costs. And somewhere else, someone is looking at the same two numbers, the balance and the minimum, and choosing the smaller one, not because they cannot afford the larger, but because the smaller one is the one the statement makes easiest to choose. While your statement says paid in full, clearly, and next month's interest charge reads 0, the way it always does, the way it was always going to. Here is what almost nobody calculates about paying the minimum. The minimum payment is never just a payment. When someone pays the minimum on a credit card balance, something happens that would not happen if they had paid it in full. The remaining balance does not simply wait patiently for next month. It accrues interest, daily, compounding, at a rate that on most cards
sits somewhere between 20 and 25% annually, a rate that very few other forms of borrowing in ordinary life come anywhere close to matching. And the minimum payment is calculated deliberately to extend that process for as long as the math allows, typically 2 to 3% of the balance, just enough to keep the account in good standing, nowhere near enough to make a meaningful dent in what is actually owed. Nowhere near enough, in fact, to come close to the interest that accrued in the same month. The statement does not announce this. It simply presents two numbers, side by side, and lets the smaller one look like the responsible choice, the number that keeps things current, that avoids the late fee, that feels, in the moment, like handling it, like exactly the kind of sensible, moderate decision a careful person would make under the circumstances. Nobody decides, in a single moment, to pay $7,000 in interest on a $5,000 balance. They decide, one statement at a time, to pay the smaller number, and the $7,000 assembles itself quietly, month after month, in the gap between what was owed and what was actually paid. A gap that compounds in the bank's favor with a quiet reliability that the original purchase never had. There is a name for why paying with a card feels less expensive than paying with cash, even when the price is identical. Researchers call it mental accounting. Richard Thaler, who won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences in 2017 largely for this body of work, documented that money is not treated as perfectly fungible in the mind. A study by Prelec and Duncan Simester at MIT in 2001 found that people were willing to pay up to twice as much for the same item when paying by credit card rather than cash. The card separates the moment of spending from the moment of paying, and that separation reduces what researchers call the pain of paying, making it easier to spend more than the cash-paying version of the same person would. Always paying the card in full is not a refusal of convenience. It is the recognition that the gap between spending and paying is exactly where the cost quietly accumulates, and that closing that gap every month closes the only door interest ever walks through. And mental accounting operates inside a system that benefits from it remaining open. The statement itself is designed around two numbers, the balance and the minimum. The minimum is printed clearly, prominently, easy to act on. The full balance is also there, but the architecture of the document makes the smaller number the path of least resistance. Credit card companies do not profit from balances paid in full. They profit from balances that carry, and the design of the statement reflects exactly whose interest it was built to serve. Always paying the card in full is not avoiding debt out of fear. It is declining to participate in a system where the easiest action on the page is also the most expensive one in the long run. And the numbers confirm what the zero interest statement already knew. According to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, a $5,000 balance carried at 22% annual interest with only the minimum paid each month can take 15 to 20 years to fully repay and cost between $7,000 and $12,000 in interest alone, more than double the original amount owed. 3 forces. A psychological gap between spending and paying that makes spending feel lighter than it is. A statement designed to make the smaller number the easier choice. And an interest charge small enough to overlook in any single month, large enough over years to roughly double what was ever actually borrowed. It was there the holiday, the photographs still on the phone, already looked at less and less, already starting to feel like someone else's trip, while the balance from booking it was still being paid down, one minimum payment at a time, months after the suitcases had been unpacked and put away and the tan had faded completely. It was there the sofa, no longer in the house, replaced, sold, given away to someone who never knew what was still owed on it, while a portion of what it cost was still showing up on the statement every month, quietly outliving the thing it had paid for, a ghost payment for furniture that belonged to someone else now. It was there the calculation, finally done properly, the full interest paid over the months the balance had carried, compared against what it would have cost to simply pay it off the first month it appeared, and the specific quality of a number that had nothing to do with what was bought and everything to do with how long it had taken to pay for it. A number that felt, once it was finally written down, considerably larger than it had ever felt, spread across a dozen unremarkable months. It was there the decision, made quietly and without ceremony, to treat the full balance as the only number on the statement that actually mattered. And the first month afterward, seeing the interest charge print as 0, and the second month, and the one after that, until 0 stopped being a small relief and became simply what the statement always said, the only outcome that had ever made any sense. These are not people who don't use credit cards. Most of them use cards constantly for the points, for the protection, for the simple convenience of not carrying cash, for the rewards that turn into flights and hotel stays they would never have budgeted for directly. What they do not do is treat the card as a way to spend money they do not currently have. The card is a payment method. It is never, under ordinary circumstances, a loan they did not mean to take out. They are the person who, when asked how they handle unexpected expenses, gives an answer that surprises people who assume credit cards are how everyone manages a shortfall. I just don't spend it until I actually have it. The card isn't where the money comes from. That is not someone without any real financial pressure at all. That is someone who decided, early on and very clearly, that the convenience of the card and the financing of the card were two completely different products, and that only one of them was ever worth using, no matter how seamlessly the other one was marketed as a feature rather than a cost. They do not feel the pull of the minimum payment at the moment the statement arrives. That pull was carefully examined, found to be the easiest path to the most expensive outcome, and set aside, permanently, the first time the actual cost of carrying a balance was calculated in full. Now, finally, the objection. Sometimes you don't have a choice. An emergency comes up. The card is what's available. Acting like carrying a balance is always a failure of discipline ignores how most people actually end up in debt. This is not about judging anyone carrying a balance through a genuine emergency, a medical bill, a job loss, a crisis that required the credit when nothing else was available. Nothing here argues against using credit when it is genuinely the only option. This is about the routine balance, the one that exists not because of an emergency, but because the minimum payment became the default, month after ordinary month, on spending that was never actually unavoidable. And the sometimes you don't have a choice argument, while it is genuinely true, applies to far fewer balances than carry one. Most revolving credit card debt in the United States is not the result of a single emergency. It is the accumulation of ordinary spending that exceeded what was available, month after month, with the minimum payment quietly absorbing the difference, turning a temporary shortfall into a structural one. The people who always pay the card in full are not claiming immunity from emergencies. They are simply refusing to let an emergency-shaped exception become the explanation for an entirely ordinary balance. Here is what most people get backwards. The person who pays the minimum, who lets the statement's smaller number guide the decision, who treats the card as a way to spread spending across months it was never actually spread across, is not managing their cash flow. They are paying a fee, disguised as flexibility, for the privilege of having spent before the money existed to cover it, a fee that grows larger the longer it goes unexamined, silently undoing whatever benefit the original purchase was supposed to provide. The person who always pays the card in full is not being conservative. They are simply declining to pay interest on money they could have spent without ever needing to borrow it, treating the card exactly for what it actually is, a tool for convenience, never a source of funds. Most people treat the minimum payment as the payment. These people treat the full balance as the only payment that was ever actually due. And the zero on next month's interest line is not a small thing. It is the entire difference between a tool and a trap. There is a moment people who always pay the card in full all describe in almost the same way. It is not the first time they paid it off. It is not a particular statement or a particular balance. It is an ordinary month, the statement arriving the way it always does, the balance and the minimum printed side by side, and reaching, without hesitation, for the number that was never actually optional, and feeling, briefly, how deliberately the smaller number was placed there, how easy it would be to choose it instead. Not discipline, exactly, just the long-settled understanding that the smaller number was never a kindness. It was an invitation, and accepted enough times becomes the most expensive decision that never once felt like a decision at all. Not because credit is dangerous, because the gap between what is owed and what is paid is exactly where the cost lives. And closing it every month, without exception, is the only way that gap never gets the chance to compound. The balance was never the point. What never letting it carry said about everything else was. 10 years from now, nobody asks what you bought. They ask whether you ever paid twice for it, once at the register, and once again, slowly, in interest. Do you always pay the card in full, or has the minimum payment become the only number you actually look at? Drop it below. We read every single one.